It's my great pleasure to be in the company of Dr. Richard Walker, who has given us some of his very valuable time before he lectures at the 9th London Anti-Aging Conference to come and chat to us. So I'd like to say good afternoon, Dr. Walker.
How are you, Phil? I appreciate being here. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You actually embarrassed me with such a friendly and laudatory greeting.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Great.
So, Dr. Walker, if I could I ask you, would you be kind enough to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, your qualifications, and the positions you hold today?
Well, my career, as you probably can see from my face, has been a long career. I've had decades working in the science of anti-aging, actually. I began my work getting my PhD from Rutgers University. And thereafter, I took a faculty position at Clemson, where I was assistant professor and subsequently associate professor of biology. But somewhere along the line, I decided I need more education, so I took several postdoctoral fellowships. And one was in Emory at this College of Medicine in Atlanta, where I studied neuroanatomy and electrophysiology. Then I did a year at Duke Medical Center, where I worked on neuropharmacology and neurophysiology, specifically reproductive physiology of aging, because by this time my career developed into a focus on understanding aging and its causes and its consequences. And then I was fortunate enough to have a final postdoc for 2 years at Berkeley with Dr. Paula Timmers, who's the late Dr. Paula Timmers, who was very helpful in launching my career. Thereafter, I went to the University of Kentucky Medical Center, the Sanders Brown Research Center on Aging, and was very fortunate to receive NIH grants there and also Department of Defense grants to work on my research in aging. I was tenured there, and I stayed in the medical school and in the Research Center on Aging for 5 years. But then was sort of wooed away, if you will, by money and alternative ventures in industry, where I went to SmithKline, at that time was SmithKline Beecham, where I was assistant director of reproductive toxicology. After a stint there, I went back to academia. I found I was better suited to the laboratory than to the to the halls of corporations, and finished my career, if you will, at the University of South Florida, where I now am located. I stayed there for 10 years, and I retired there as the director for research and research compliance. And then after retiring, I started my own company, a consulting company for physicians called Physicians Scientific Research Incorporated. So I continue to write. I'm an editor-in-chief now of Clinical Interventions in Aging. It's a journal for practitioners of anti-aging medicines, published by Dove Medical Press.
Very good.
In New Zealand and in London here. And basically that's it. That brings us up to date. My research lately has been working with unique children that seem to show significant retardation of development, because this forms the basis for my research in aging. I could talk more about that some other time.
That's wonderful. Very informative and very impressive. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Walker. That's a very impressive list. And I know that one of your areas of expertise is around growth hormone and some of its analogues like Sermorelin. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that today, if you don't mind. But just before we go there, I wonder if you could remind our viewers, what are some of the benefits of having, shall we say, normal growth hormone levels?
Well, that question in itself is provocative to some extent. I've been trained in endocrinology as a doctoral candidate, and then also did, as I told you before, some postdoctoral training in neuroendocrinology, especially of reproductive senescence. In terms of that aspect, growth hormone is perhaps one of the most important endocrine hormones we have. It's somatotrophic. I mean, the name is somatotrophin, implying that it has an influence over the entire body. And indeed, that's the case. The fact is that the levels or the concentrations in the blood are never constant. They change throughout life. They're high early in life and then they decline thereafter. So what one says for normal really is somewhat of a statistical question rather than a biological or medical one. What we know that is relevant, at least to my interest and the interest of people that study aging, is that the declining levels of hormones that occur after we become adults and then proceed to very low levels in older age really represent an insufficiency, not a frank growth hormone deficiency, but an insufficiency that has ramifications because the absence of growth hormone or the reduction of its concentrations as we grow older definitely contributes to changes, maladaptive changes in our body, such as reduction in bone mineralization, loss of muscle, effects on circulation, protection of through the immune system. So there have been concerns that the loss of growth hormone or the reduction in growth hormone has medical implications, and I believe they do as well. And that the consequences of aging, the manifest consequences, can be abated to some extent by clinically altering the levels of growth hormone that exist in the body.
I see. Thank you very much. Well, thank you again, Dr. Walker. That's a very interesting insight. And of course, we should also mention, of course, that whilst there are these advantages, shall we say, to having a good growth hormone level, that there are also some issues, not just the regulatory issues, surrounding growth hormone replacement. Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, actually, you're right. There are some disadvantages, but these mostly relate to the doses, not the dose, but the form in which, the molecular form in which growth hormone is administered. Now, when there was really first interest in growth hormone as a replacement paradigm, it came from the studies of Rudman in the 90s, who showed that older men using growth hormone on a regular basis for 6 months showed improvement in body composition primarily. Well, since then, and this has been now couple decades, people have been using recombinant growth hormone, less so lately than they were before, but associated with this hormone are some side effects, and these include changes in glucose metabolism, and again it's related to dose. Has to do with the fact that when one administers growth hormone, the recombinant growth hormone, you're basically using it as a drug because you're injecting the amount of hormone that you choose, but it's coming into the body as a single bolus presentation, and it extincts as a square wave. So what we have is a initial high level after injection, and it goes down, 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 down. So unless you have really a perfect titration of dose, then you can exceed the body's, not expectation, but the body's familiarization with the growth hormone. And as a result, you then can have alterations in blood pressure, for example. And as I was saying, when you administer growth hormone, you're really administering the final product of the pituitary gland. So physiologically, this is not presenting itself to the body as the body normally would present growth hormone to itself. Therefore, there's a tendency for downstream to be hyperstimulated, and as a result, then initially you can get metabolic alterations. You also can get tachyphylaxis or downregulation to the effects. So while you might get a significant effect initially, it'll attenuate after time. These feedback effects also, in a paradoxical way, accelerate aging of the pituitary gland. And there are many reports, although one sticks in my mind, showing that the receptor for the neurohormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, actually downregulates when you use recombinant growth hormone. So there's a strong negative feedback on the pituitary gland, accelerating its inability to produce growth hormone. And so it's counterproductive in that sense when we consider what aging is doing to the growth hormone axis. Aging is causing it to decline and wane anyway. So by administering the end product, we're essentially accelerating the decay of the pituitary. Alternatively, what we like to do is to actually find a way to stimulate as much of the axis, the growth hormone axis, as we can to generate a normal physiological response. Now, growth hormone is released episodically, so it comes out in pulses. This is different from when you inject recombinant growth hormone, which is a square wave phenomenon.
Yes.
So I have an interest in anti-aging medicine that focuses on what I like to call primary locus intervention. If we can get to the highest level of intervention to simulate the physiology of the whole system, then we really are doing our job as best we can. So presently, we can't get into the brain yet and give a specific stimulus to the nuclei that secrete GHRH. We don't have that capacity. We can create non-specific stimuli, such as those with L-DOPA or insulin or some other factors, clonidine. But we can give a specific stimulus to the pituitary gland. And there is a molecule that is an analog of growth hormone releasing hormone, the brain hormone, and that's called Sermorelin or Sermorelin, however it's pronounced in different places. But basically what that is an analog of the naturally occurring hormone and consisting of the first 29 amino acids. That's been cut when Guillemin first discovered the molecule back in the 70s, really. One of his postdocs, Bill Wernberg, cut the molecule in pieces until he found that the first 29 amino acids were all that were necessary to specifically bind the saturable receptor in the pituitary gland and to initiate the cascade of intracellular functions that created or that stimulated the production of message and then the transduction of that message into growth hormone. What happened then was the pituitary filled with growth hormone so that signaling, any kind of normal signaling, would be amplified and one would get a better episodic release. And so in that case, in this case now, we're really sort of simulating physiology. We're replenishing the growth hormone insufficiency, but we're also doing it in a way that is relatively free of side effects. The reason being, now we are using the feedback system not to shut things down above, but to regulate the levels of growth hormone that actually release from the pituitary gland.
Very interesting.
And there's one thing that's peculiar, not peculiar, it's peculiar to the pituitary, is that stimulation of these cells upregulates, not downregulates.
I see.
So therefore, you don't get a tachyphylaxis by using Sermorelin. You actually improve the performance of the replacement therapy because not only are you stimulating more and more message, but you're also increasing pituitary reserve so that daily injection is not necessary. Although it's good, it keeps the pituitary full, but over time it is sustained and the pituitary reserve will go, even if you miss a day or two, you'll continue to get output, a normal physiological output of the pituitary growth hormone.
That's very interesting. We must talk a little bit more about Sermorelin. Thank you.